The visiting room buzzed with the low hum of restless voices, the clink of vending machines, and the echo of guards' boots against concrete. Derek Cole sat at the metal table closest to the window, his hands folded tightly, the veins on his forearms rising with every beat of his heart. He'd been waiting for this day, 3 months since he last saw Maya. 3 months of counting down minutes in a cell that smelled like sweat and metal. He'd shaved that morning, the first time in weeks. The cracked mirror above the sink had shown him a stranger, hollow cheeks, sunken eyes, a stare that didn't soften even when he smiled. But now, as the heavy door buzzed open and Maya stepped through, something flickered in him. Relief, maybe. Or recognition. Or something harder to name. Maya looked smaller than he remembered. Her hair was pulled back into a neat bun, her pale pink blouse ironed so flat it almost looked new. But her eyes, those warm, steady eyes that had once made prison walls disappear, seemed distant, like she wasn't really there. She hesitated before sitting, her purse clutched close to her chest. "Hey, baby," Derek said, forcing a smile. His voice came out rough, too eager. "Hey," she replied softly. The word felt rehearsed, polite. For a few seconds, neither spoke. The silence between them was louder than the room around them. Derek watched her fingers twitch, watched her glance at the guard station more than once. "You okay?" he asked finally. She nodded. "Yeah. Just tired. Work's been crazy." He studied her, his jaw tightening. Something was off, her tone, her posture, her refusal to meet his eyes. "You sure that's all?" "Of course," she said, smiling briefly, though it didn't reach her eyes. He wanted to believe her. He wanted to ignore the gnawing voice in his head that whispered she'd changed. But it was there, same as the cold metal beneath his palms. "You used to tell me everything," he said quietly. "Now it feels like I don't know what's going on out there anymore." Her lips parted as if she might say something, but she didn't. Instead, she reached across the table and placed her hand over his. It was a delicate touch, but her fingers trembled. "Derek, things get complicated out there," she said finally, eyes darting toward the guard again. "I'm trying to keep it together. For both of us." He squeezed her hand, though her skin felt colder than he remembered. "You think I don't see it? The letters get shorter, your visits get fewer. What's going on, Maya?" Her voice caught. "Don't start, please. Not here." Something in her tone, pleading, fearful, stung deeper than anger ever could. Derek leaned back, studying her face like a puzzle he couldn't solve. "You're hiding something," he said flatly. Her jaw clenched, but she said nothing. The silence stretched again, filled only by the ticking clock on the far wall. A guard called out that visits would end in 5 minutes. Maya's relief was almost visible. She pulled her hand away, stood too quickly, and fumbled with her purse strap. "I'll write you," she said softly, eyes glistening. He wanted to stop her, to demand the truth, to make her look him in the eye, but all he could do was nod. "Yeah," he muttered, forcing steadiness. "You do that." She turned, walking toward the exit, her heels clicking across the linoleum. Derek watched until the door shut behind her. For a long moment he stayed there, staring at the empty chair across from him. The scent of her perfume lingered faintly, almost mocking. Then, as the guards began ushering inmates back to their cells, Derek whispered under his breath, "What aren't you telling me, Maya?" The question echoed in his head all the way back to his cell, where, that night, he'd begin to read her last letter again, searching every line for what she didn't say. That night, Derek lay on his bunk with the dim light flickering above, Maya's letters spread out across the thin blanket like pieces of a crime scene. Each one carried her scent faintly, lavender and paper, and her handwriting, neat and looping, had once been his comfort. Now, every word felt suspicious. Every sentence, rehearsed. He ran his thumb over the first letter she ever sent. "Dear Derek, I don't know what made me write to you, but something in your story felt unfinished." That line had hooked him from the start. Back then, he'd been 2 years into a 10-year sentence for aggravated assault, angry, alone, and convinced the world had forgotten him. Then Maya's letters started arriving, once a week like clockwork, each one filled with warmth, humor, and a softness he hadn't felt since freedom. He used to count the days until mail call, waiting for that envelope with her looping M. Her words were music in a place made of noise and rage. She told him about her favorite books, her quiet apartment, how she hated storms but loved the sound of rain. He'd pictured her hundreds of times, imagined what she looked like before the prison photo confirmed it, the same woman who now avoided his eyes. But tonight, something felt wrong. He pulled out her most recent letter, dated 3 weeks before her last visit. "I'm working longer hours," it read. "My boss keeps me busy, but I'm saving up for us. Maybe for when you get out." He frowned. The week before, she'd said she was between jobs. 2 letters, 2 different lives. "You seen ghosts again, Cole?" The voice came from the bunk below. Rico, his cellmate, was propped up on one elbow, smirking. He'd been watching Derek sift through the letters for an hour. "Mind your business," Derek muttered. Rico chuckled, lighting a contraband cigarette with a piece of wire. "Ain't ghosts I'm seeing, man. Just you going crazy over a woman who don't look you in the eye no more." Derek's head snapped down. "You don't know her." Rico took a drag, smoke curling around his grin. "Maybe not as Maya, no. But I seen that face before. Different name, Derek froze. "What the hell you mean by that?" Rico shrugged, stretching lazily. "I don't mean nothing. Just saying she used to come see another guy here. Few years back. Same smile, same eyes. Called herself something else then. Michelle, I think." "That's bull," Derek said, though his voice cracked slightly. Rico blew smoke toward the ceiling. "Maybe. Or maybe your little fairy tale got more chapters than you read." The lights dimmed for lockdown, and the cell fell into darkness. But Derek couldn't sleep. The words different name gnawed at him like rust eating through metal. He replayed every detail of her stories, every inconsistency he'd brushed aside. How she never mentioned family, how she changed the name of her hometown once, how she avoided sending photos until he begged. He reached under his mattress and pulled out another envelope, older, worn. This one had always stood out. No return address, no perfume, just her handwriting and a date. "Some things about me are hard to explain," it read, "but I need you to trust me." He hadn't thought twice about it before. Now those words felt like a warning. From the darkness below, Rico's voice drifted up again, quieter this time. "Women lie, Cole. Especially the ones who come looking for love in places like this." Derek didn't answer. He just stared at the letter, the paper trembling between his fingers. Somewhere deep inside, a quiet thought began to form, one he didn't want to believe. What if the woman who saved him from loneliness was never really who she said she was? Outside, the rain started to fall against the narrow window, soft and rhythmic, the same sound Maya once said she loved. But now, it only made the walls feel colder. 2 weeks passed before Maya returned. Derek had written her 4 letters in that time, long, desperate ones filled with apologies, confusion, and quiet suspicion. Only one came back, shorter than usual, colder. "I'll visit soon. Please stop listening to others." Now she was here again, sitting across from him behind the thick glass divider. The hum of conversation filled the visiting hall, but for Derek, the world narrowed to that small window between them. Her eyes were softer this time, her smile careful, like someone rehearsing how to love. "You look tired," she said, her voice low through the phone. "Been thinking too much," he replied, forcing a laugh. "You got me hooked on your words, now I can't trust me." Maya frowned slightly. "What does that mean?" Derek leaned closer. "You said you worked at a bookstore, then a law office. Which one's real, Maya?" She looked away. "Sometimes I change jobs. Why does that matter?" "Because people talk," he said, eyes narrowing. "Because Rico said he's seen you here before. Different name." Her lips parted, fear flashing across her face. "Rico?" she whispered. "You can't listen to." Before she could finish, a guard approached, stopping briefly beside her. He bent down, saying something too low to hear. But as the guard straightened, one sentence cut through the buzz of voices, just loud enough to reach Derek's ears. "Does he know yet?" Maya's face drained of color. She shot a quick glare at the guard, who walked away without another word. Derek froze, phone still pressed to his ear, his heartbeat pounding in his temples. "What was that?" he demanded. She blinked, pretending confusion. "What was what?" "That guard. What did he mean?" "I don't know what you're talking about," she said too quickly. "Maya," he said slowly, voice trembling with anger, "what aren't you telling me?" Her lips trembled. "Please, Derek. Not here." He slammed his fist against the divider, startling a nearby visitor. "Tell me." A guard looked over, but Maya lifted a hand, signaling she was fine. Her eyes glistened as she whispered, "You have to trust me. I'll explain soon." But trust was already gone. The word yet echoed in his skull like a countdown. Does he know yet? Know what? About the job lies? The name? Or something worse? The visit ended moments later. As she stood, she pressed her hand against the glass, but he didn't raise his. She looked at him one last time, sorrow in her eyes, guilt in her trembling mouth, before turning away. Back in his cell that night, Derek didn't sleep. The whisper haunted him, looping in his mind. He tore open old letters again, looking for anything he'd missed. A slip, a clue, a truth buried in ink. He read until dawn, eyes burning, fingers trembling. Every word she'd ever written now felt like a lie. By morning, Derek made a decision. If the truth wouldn't come to him, he'd find it himself, even if it meant crossing lines no one came back from. The night after Maya's visit, the prison felt heavier than usual. The halls were silent except for the distant hum of generators and the occasional clang of a cell door. Derek lay awake staring at the ceiling, the whisper still circling his mind like a vulture. Does he know yet? Rico's snores came from below, deep and uneven. Derek envied his calm. But he knew the man was hiding something. The smirk, the vague comments, the way he said he'd seen Maya before. Derek's patience was gone. "Rico," he hissed through the darkness. No answer. He sat up, gripping the edge of the bunk. "Rico!" The man stirred, groaning. "What, Cole? You're gonna keep me up all night again?" "I need you to tell me what you meant," Derek said, voice tight. "About Maya. About her name." Rico rubbed his face, blinking groggily, but Derek saw the flicker of hesitation in his eyes. Fear, maybe. Or guilt. "You don't want that answer, brother." "Yes, I do," Derek snapped. "You said you knew her. That she used to be someone else. What's that supposed to mean?" Rico sighed and sat up, lighting a half-burned cigarette with a hidden match. Smoke coiled around the tiny space like fog. "You ever hear of a guy named Michael Lane?" The name meant nothing to Derek. He shook his head. "Didn't think so," Rico continued. "Used to come around here a few years back. Visited a guy in D Block. Always quiet, always polite. But it wasn't he back then, or maybe it was before. I dunno. People talked. Rumors said Michael changed." Derek frowned. "Changed?" Rico exhaled slowly, eyes darting toward the cell door. "I mean like, transitioned, man. Became someone else. A woman. New name. New life. Same eyes that... I remember those eyes." The words hung in the air, heavy and poisonous. Derek stared at him, unblinking. "You're saying my wife. I'm saying, maybe she ain't the person she told you she was," Rico interrupted. "Look, I ain't judging. People do what they got to do. But if she's the same person I seen, she's been living a lie for a long time." Derek felt his heartbeat climb into his throat. "You're lying." Rico's expression softened. "Wish I was." Derek shoved off the bunk, pacing the tiny cell. The metal floor groaned beneath his bare feet. "No. Maya's real. She loves me. You're just stirring up. Why would I make that up?" Rico said calmly. "Ain't worth nothin' to me." Silence. The only sound was Derek's ragged breathing. His hands trembled as he pressed them to his forehead. Images flashed through his mind. Maya's hesitation, her secrets, the whisper. Does he know yet? He turned toward Rico again, voice cracking. "If what you're saying is true, then why? Why come here, why write to me?" Rico shrugged. Maybe she felt guilty. Maybe she wanted to start fresh. Or maybe she thought you'd never find out. Derek sank onto the cold floor, his back against the bunk. The cell felt smaller now, the air thick and suffocating. Every word Rico said tore at the thin fabric of his reality. He wanted to scream, but the sound stuck in his chest. People ain't always what they seem, Rico murmured. That's the world, man. Derek didn't answer. He sat in silence long after the cigarette burned out, staring at the faint orange ember fade into black. Hours passed before the morning bell echoed through the corridor. Rico was already asleep again, but Derek hadn't closed his eyes once. His thoughts spun, furious and unrelenting. If Maya had lied about this, if she'd hidden that, then everything between them was built on deceit. Every touch, every promise, every letter. And yet, buried beneath the anger, something else stirred, shame. Shame for the disgust that followed love. Shame for the confusion that clawed at him. By breakfast call, he wasn't sure what hurt more, the lie itself, or the fact that he still wanted to believe her. As the cell doors opened, Derek whispered under his breath, almost like a vow, "I'll find out who you really are." By morning, Derek's face looked carved from stone. He barely spoke during roll call, barely touched his breakfast. Every sound, the clang of trays, the shouts from other inmates, blurred into static. All he could hear were Rico's words echoing in his head, Michael Lane. Transitioned. Same eyes. He needed proof. Not rumors, not whispers, proof he could see, touch, believe. That afternoon, during his counseling session, he decided to get it. Ms. Harlow, the prison's mental health counselor, was one of the few staff members who treated inmates like people. She was middle-aged, gentle-eyed, and always wore a silver bracelet that jingled softly when she moved. Derek had spent months earning her trust, talking about regret, progress, healing. She believed he was changing. Now he planned to use that. "So, Derek," she said as she sat across from him, clipboard balanced on her lap. "You've been quieter lately. Want to talk about what's bothering you?" He hesitated, looking down, letting his voice tremble just enough. "It's Maya. My wife." Ms. Harlow nodded slowly. "I remember you mentioning her. Has something happened?" "She's been different. He rubbed his temples, breathing heavily. "I don't even know who she is anymore." Concern flashed across her face. "Do you think she's in trouble?" He looked up, eyes glassy. "I think she's lying to me. I don't want to accuse her without proof, but I need to know the truth. Please." Ms. Harlow hesitated, the bracelet around her wrist glinting under the fluorescent light. "Derek, I can't share visitor information. It's confidential." "I'm not asking for her secrets," he said softly. "I need to know if she's who she says she is. For my peace of mind. For my therapy. I can't move forward while I'm thinking she's." He stopped, letting the emotion choke him mid-sentence. The silence that followed did the rest. Finally she sighed. "I shouldn't be doing this." He looked at her, hope and desperation mixing in his eyes. Ms. Harlow stood, unlocking a small cabinet near her desk. She pulled out a folder, thick and labeled Visitor Logs 2021 to 2024. She flipped through pages, scanning names. "Maya Cole, correct?" Derek nodded, hands clenched. She paused, frowning. "That's strange." "What?" "There's an old record, same address, same date of birth, but under a different name." Her voice faltered. "Michael Lane." For a second, the room went silent. Derek stared at her, eyes wide, unblinking. "Say that again." She swallowed hard. "Michael Lane. The file says gender changed legally in 2018. It lists both names as connected, which means..." He didn't let her finish. His chair scraped back violently as he stood. The walls felt like they were closing in, the air thick and sharp. "She lied," he whispered, voice breaking. "She lied to me." "Derek," Ms. Harlow began, but he was already pacing, muttering under his breath. "Michael Lane." The name pulsed through his skull like a curse. Every letter, every word Maya had written now twisted into deceit. She had looked him in the eye, kissed him through glass, called him, "my love," and it was all built on a lie. He stopped suddenly, staring out the narrow window behind Ms. Harlow. "Do you know what it's like," he said quietly, "to give someone your soul, and find out they were someone else the whole time?" Ms. Harlow's voice softened. She probably feared how you'd react, Derek. Maybe she was trying to protect herself. Protect herself from what? He snapped, turning sharply. From the truth. She flinched. From judgment. He stared at her, breathing hard, then forced a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Yeah. Guess she had a reason. When he left her office, he walked calmly. Too calmly. The guards nodded as he passed. To anyone else, he looked steady, composed. But inside, something dark had snapped. That night in his cell, Derek sat motionless on his bunk, staring into the dim light. The truth replayed over and over. Maya was Michael. Michael became Maya. Maya lied. Rico's snoring faded in the background as Derek whispered to himself, voice low, almost reverent. She took everything from me. Trust. My manhood. My name. His hand clenched into a fist. And somewhere in the distance, a plan began to take shape, one he called justice. That night, Derek couldn't tell if he was awake or dreaming. His mind looped through fragments of the past, his father's voice, his own reflection, Maya's trembling eyes behind glass. The truth had cracked something deep inside him, and now everything that came after was filtered through rage. He lay in his bunk, staring at the ceiling, while the noise of the prison blurred into a dull hum. Rico was asleep, but Derek's thoughts clawed at him like nails on steel. Michael Lane. Maya. The same person. The idea poisoned every memory he had, her laughter, her letters, her love. What had once felt pure now felt like humiliation. He saw his father again, in a memory he wished he'd buried. The old man stood in their tiny kitchen, reeking of whiskey, a belt hanging from his fist. Derek was 9, trembling by the sink. You let people laugh at you, boy, and you're not a man, his father had growled. You hit back, boys. That was how Derek learned love wasn't tenderness, it was dominance. Power. Control. A man had to keep the world beneath his boot, or the world would crush him first. His mother had tried to teach him different, but her voice had always been drowned out by the sound of leather striking skin. Now, lying in his cell, those lessons came back sharp and cruel. He thought of Maya, no, Michael, smiling at him like nothing was wrong. The idea that she'd fooled him, made him look like a fool in front of everyone, burned deeper than any wound. You think I'm weak? He muttered to the darkness. His pulse pounded against his temples. Images flashed, Maya's delicate hands, the way she avoided his touch last visit, her soft voice saying, please, not here. It wasn't love anymore. It was mockery. He pushed himself off the bunk, pacing the small space like a caged animal. She played me, he whispered. She knew what I'd do if I found out. That's why she hid it. He saw Rico shift below, half asleep. You talkin' to yourself again, Cole? Go back to sleep, Derek snapped. Rico grunted and rolled over. But the question lingered in Derek's head anyway. Was he talking to himself, or to the ghost of Maya that followed him now? He remembered their first meeting through the visiting glass, her nervous laugh, how her fingers tapped the table, how he'd told her she was too good for a man like him. She'd smiled then, eyes shining. You don't know me yet, she'd said. Now he knew. Derek sank onto the cold floor, his hands clasped behind his neck. His chest tightened, breath coming fast. He could feel shame pressing down on him, the same kind that had haunted him since childhood, the shame of being powerless, of being fooled. He'd spent his life fighting to be feared, to be in control. And now, a single lie had reduced him to nothing. His father's voice came again, cruel and familiar. A man doesn't let anyone make him small. Derek's jaw clenched until his teeth ached. You're right, he whispered. No one makes a fool out to me. Something inside him shifted, slow, deliberate, final. His love for Maya twisted into something darker, a mix of betrayal and righteousness. It wasn't about her being Michael anymore. It was about her taking his power, his pride, his identity. And in his fractured mind, the only way to reclaim it was through punishment. He stood, breathing hard, staring at the cell bars that glowed faintly in the corridor light. His reflection shimmered against the metal, a face he barely recognized, eyes wild, unblinking. You lied, he said to the reflection, but the voice that answered wasn't his own. It was his father's again, echoing through memory, "Then make it right." Derek nodded slowly, his pulse steadying. A strange calm replaced the chaos, the kind that comes before a storm breaks. By morning, his plan was taking shape. Maya would visit again. She always did. And when she did, he'd look her in the eye, the way his father once looked at him, and make sure she understood what truth really cost. Morning broke through the barred windows in streaks of gray. Derek sat on his bunk, motionless, eyes open but far away. The storm that had raged inside him all night had quieted into something colder, calculated. He had stopped shaking. Now, every thought moved like clockwork, precise and deliberate. He knew anger alone wouldn't get him what he wanted. Anger was loud. It drew attention. What he needed was control, his father's lesson echoing through every breath. You don't win by shouting. You win by making others move when you don't have to. At breakfast, he began setting the pieces. Rico sat across from him, chewing slow, watching. "You're real quiet today," Rico said. "You got that look again." Derek glanced up, feigning indifference. "Need a favor?" Rico raised a brow. "That usually means trouble." "Not for you," Derek said, sliding a folded note across the table. "Just get this to Alvarez. Tell him I'll pay with the watch I've got stashed." Rico hesitated, then tucked the note under his tray. Alvarez was a lifer with connections. A man who could make things happen, even behind bars. If anyone could get Derek a few unguarded minutes in the visiting room, it was him. By the time lunch rolled around, the answer came back. Alvarez had agreed, for a price. Derek didn't flinch. He'd pay whatever it took. That afternoon, he found his way to Counselor Hayes' office. The woman had always treated him with sympathy, seeing the broken man beneath the inmate. Derek used that now. "I've been doing the reflection exercises you gave me," he said, soft-spoken, rehearsed. "Trying to make things right with my wife. Thought maybe you could arrange another visit, private, just for a few minutes. Closure." Hayes smiled faintly, scribbling in her folder. "I think that's good, Derek. Progress. I'll see what I can do." He thanked her with a sincerity that wasn't real, his hands trembling just enough to sell it. When he walked out, the guard on duty, Kemp, gave him a long, suspicious look. Derek smiled back. "What? You never seen a man try to fix his marriage?" Kemp didn't reply, but Derek saw the curiosity flicker in his eyes, the first seed planted. He'd nurture it if needed. Everyone could be bent a little if you found the right leverage. That night, he lay awake, eyes open to the dark, going over the plan again. He would sit calmly when she arrived, speak softly, let her think it was just another visit. Then, when the guard's attention drifted for those few precious minutes, he'd finally reclaim what she took from him. He wasn't sure yet what form it would take, words, violence, confession, but he knew one thing, she would not walk away untouched. Still, part of him wrestled with hesitation. He could almost hear Maya's voice reading one of her letters aloud in his mind. "You said once you wanted to become better than your past. I believed you." He shut his eyes tight, forcing the memory away. She lied about everything. The next day, word came down. The visit was approved for Friday, unmonitored for 5 minutes due to therapeutic confidentiality. It was all he needed. At dinner, Rico smirked when he heard. "So, you really gonna do it?" Derek met his gaze, expression blank. "I'm just gonna talk to her." But inside, his pulse quickened, every beat echoing with purpose. He could already see it. Maya walking through the metal detector, her face calm, trusting. He'd smile, reach across the table, and the truth, his truth, would finally have its moment. When lights out came, Derek whispered into the darkness, not to Rico, not to his father's ghost, but to the thought of her. 5 minutes. That's all I need. Friday came wrapped in quiet tension. Even the air in the corridor seemed heavier as Derek was led toward the visiting room. His wrists were cuffed, but his expression was calm, disturbingly so. The guards noticed, whispered between themselves. They'd seen anger before, tears before, but not that kind of calm. The kind that comes right before something breaks. Inside, the visiting hall buzzed with the murmur of families, clinking vending machines, and the occasional child's cry. But Derek's table, the far corner one, had been marked for private visitation. No guards within arm's reach. 5 minutes of solitude. That was all. Then she walked in. Maya. She looked different, softer, smaller somehow. Her hair was pulled back, no makeup this time, just her raw face. Her hands shook as she adjusted her visitor pass. The guard at the door nodded, and she approached the table. Derek's eyes never left her. "Hi," she whispered, sitting down. He smiled faintly. "You came. I said I would." Silence hung between them for a moment, thick, suffocating. The hum of the room blurred. "I've been meaning to tell you something," Maya began, her voice trembling but earnest. "For a while now I've wanted to." "You mean the truth?" Derek cut in, his tone low, steady. Maya's lips parted. "What do you mean?" He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper that burned. "I know who you are. Who you were. Michael Lane." Her eyes widened, color draining from her face. "Derek, I read your file," he interrupted. "Every detail. The surgeries, the name change. All of it." She swallowed hard, tears forming. "I was going to tell you. I swear I was scared. I thought you'd see me, not just what I was before." "What you were before?" he spat, his voice cracking. "You think that makes this better? You think lying about something like that ain't a betrayal?" "It wasn't a lie, Derek. It was protection. I didn't know how you'd react. I loved you." He let out a bitter laugh, eyes glinting with disbelief. "Loved me? You built a whole fantasy. Letters, stories, lies, all of it fake." Maya's tears broke free. "No, it wasn't fake. Every word I wrote was real. You made me feel like I mattered, like I wasn't just." "Don't," he growled. "Don't make this about you." Their voices had begun to draw attention. A guard at the far end of the room turned his head but didn't move yet. The tension seemed like a private storm no one dared step into. "I was going to tell you today," she said desperately. "That's why I came. I couldn't keep it from you anymore. I wanted to start over, if you'd let me." Derek's jaw clenched. The words scraped something raw inside him. His father's voice flashed like lightning in his mind. "Don't ever let anyone make a fool out to you, boy. Ever." His breathing quickened. "Start over?" he repeated, quieter now, almost shaking. "You made me believe I could be loved. You let me talk about marriage, about a future. And the whole time," Maya reached for his hand. "Derek, please." The touch broke something. He jerked his hand back violently, the chair scraping loud against the floor. "Don't touch me." Heads turned. Maya froze. Derek's body trembled as if containing something too big to hold. "I trusted you," he whispered, tears streaking his face now. "And you made me feel like I was the fool my father said I'd always be." "Derek, stop." But the words never finished. In one sudden motion, faster than anyone could react, Derek lunged forward. His hands wrapped around her throat, the table rattling as Maya's chair toppled backward. Her gasp turned into a choked plea, nails scratching at his arms. Screams erupted across the room. Guards shouted. Feet pounded. The sound of chairs scraping filled the air. "Get him off her." 2 guards tackled Derek from behind, pulling him off with brutal force. Maya lay on the floor, coughing, tears and panic in her eyes. Derek struggled, roaring, veins bulging, his voice cracked with something between fury and heartbreak. "She lied to me," he screamed as they dragged him away. "You hear me? She lied to me." The guards wrestled him down, cuffed him hard, and shoved him toward the door. Maya sat trembling, clutching her neck, her breath ragged but alive. Her eyes followed him, not with hatred, but something far more haunting, pity. Derek caught that look as they forced him out. It burned deeper than any wound. He twisted, shouting again, but the steel door slammed behind him. The noise of the hall faded into silence. Inside the locked corridor, his breath came in ragged bursts. He could still feel her skin against his palms, still hear the faint whisper of her voice. Not fear, not hatred, but sorrow. For the first time, Derek wasn't sure who the monster was anymore. The room had gone still, that heavy, suffocating stillness that follows violence. The kind where even sound seems afraid to exist. Maya lay motionless on the linoleum floor, her hand twitching once before going limp. The faint metallic scent of blood mixed with disinfectant and fear. One of her earrings rolled across the tiles, spinning in slow circles until it stopped near Derek's foot. He sat on the ground, wrists cuffed, chest heaving, his shirt smeared with streaks of red. Not all of it hers. The struggle had left his arms scratched raw. His head hung low, eyes fixed on nothing, lips moving as if repeating a prayer. "She lied to me," he whispered again. "She lied." Around him, chaos swelled. Guards barked orders, radios crackled, inmates in the adjacent visiting stations shouted in confusion. A medic slid to Maya's side, pressing trembling fingers against her neck, searching for something, anything. "Pulse is weak. She's breathing barely." The medic yelled. The words didn't reach Derek. He heard them, but they didn't make sense. His mind had retreated somewhere deep, back to the sound of his father's voice echoing in his skull. "Don't you ever let anyone make a fool out you." He had obeyed. And now, sitting in the middle of that blood-slicked floor, he realized what obedience had cost. A guard approached cautiously, baton drawn. "Cole," he said, voice steady but cold, "you hear me?" Derek looked up, eyes hollow. "She was supposed to love me." "Get him out here," another guard ordered. They hauled him to his feet. His body moved, but it wasn't his own doing. He felt detached, like watching a movie in slow motion. The crowd blurred, a swirl of uniforms, shouting, tears. Somewhere behind him, Maya coughed, a wet, broken sound that cut through the noise. He froze for a second, twisting his head, but the guards yanked him forward. As they dragged him through the hallway, he left behind faint red fingerprints on the door frame. The trail looked like ghosts reaching back toward what couldn't be undone. Inside the holding corridor, the noise dimmed. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, cruelly bright. They shoved him into a chair, and for a moment, no one spoke. A clock ticked somewhere far away, sharp, deliberate, echoing against the concrete walls. Blood still clung beneath his fingernails. He stared at it, mesmerized. The stain felt permanent, carved deeper than skin. "She lied," he murmured again, softer this time, almost tender, as if convincing himself. A young correctional officer standing nearby shifted uncomfortably. "Man, what did she even do to you?" he muttered under his breath. Derek lifted his head slowly, eyes locking with the guards. "She made me believe I was worth something," he said. "Then she took it away." The officer swallowed hard and looked away. Minutes stretched into hours. The noise from the visiting room faded completely. Only silence remained, the kind that didn't bring peace but punishment. Derek could almost hear the drip of blood from his sleeve, rhythmic and haunting. When they finally came to move him, 2 guards lifted him by the arms. His legs trembled but held. As they led him toward isolation, he glanced once toward the small window in the corridor. Beyond it, sunlight flickered off the razor wire, bright, indifferent, almost beautiful. He thought of Maya's eyes, how they'd looked the first time she smiled at him through the glass. How those same eyes had widened in fear just before everything went black. The memory stayed with him, carved behind his eyelids, unrelenting. As the cell door slammed shut behind him, the sound echoed like a gunshot. For a moment, there was only breath, his, ragged and uneven, and then silence swallowed it whole. He sat on the cold floor, staring at his blood-stained hands, and whispered one last time, almost to the darkness itself, "She lied to me." 3 weeks later, the air inside the penitentiary was still heavy with what had happened. The incident had made national news, headlines screaming, "Inmate kills transgender wife in prison visit." The world outside wanted answers, outrage, and closure. But inside his isolation cell, Derek Cole sat in silence, waiting. The guards led him to a small, windowless room. A single camera sat on a tripod across from him, red light blinking. A woman in her mid-30s, clean-cut but visibly tense, adjusted her mic. Her name was Lena Shaw, an investigative journalist working on a true crime documentary about violence and deception inside prisons. She cleared her throat softly. "Thank you for agreeing to speak with us, Mr. Cole." Derek looked up, his wrists chained to the table. Guess people want to hear the monster talk, he muttered. Lena hesitated. People want to understand why. He smiled faintly. Ain't much to understand. The camera whirred quietly. Lena took a deep breath and began. Tell me about Maya. For the first time, something flickered across his face. Not remorse, not quite pain, but memory. She was light, he said slowly. Wrote me letters when I didn't even believe in God no more. Made me feel human again. He paused, eyes narrowing. But it wasn't real. None of it was. You mean when you found out she was transgender? Lena asked carefully. His jaw tensed. I mean when I found out she lied. You don't build love on a lie. Lena shifted in her seat. Some might say she was protecting herself. The world hasn't been kind to people like her. Derek let out a low laugh, humorless, hollow. Protecting herself? She walked into a prison, looked me in the eye, and let me dream. That ain't protection, that's cruelty. He leaned closer, eyes dark. Truth demanded blood. And I gave it. The words hung in the air like a confession carved from stone. Lena flinched slightly, though she tried not to show it. So, you believe what you did was justified? Derek looked directly into the camera lens. I believe truth's got a price. Sometimes it's yours. Sometimes it's someone else's. Silence filled the room again. Only the soft hum of the fluorescent lights buzzed above them. Lena's hands trembled slightly as she turned to the final page of her notes. Her voice softened. Do you regret it? For a long time, Derek didn't answer. He just stared past her, past the camera, as if searching for something that wasn't there anymore. Then slowly he smiled, small, tired, almost peaceful. Regret, he repeated. That's for people who don't know who they are. The interview ended there. The guards escorted him back to isolation. As the door shut behind him, Lena exhaled, realizing she'd been holding her breath the entire time. Outside the prison walls, protests lined the streets. Candles, posters, and flowers filled the sidewalks. Maya's picture, smiling, alive, stood at the center of every vigil. The words, "Justice for Maya Lane," glowed across handmade banners. A reporter's voice played over the footage of the crowd. Advocates are calling this case a tragedy born of hate and secrecy. Maya Lane's story has since sparked national conversations about trans safety and the dangers of stigma. Inside his cell, Derek couldn't hear the chants, but he could almost feel them, the collective heartbeat of a world he no longer belonged to. He sat on his bunk, staring at the wall where a faint shadow of his cuffed hands danced under the dim light. Somewhere deep in his chest, he felt the echo of Maya's laughter from months ago, soft and real. For a brief moment, it almost sounded like forgiveness. But then it was gone. And in the silence that followed, Derek whispered to no one, truth demanded blood, and it got it. The night after the documentary aired, the world saw Maya Lane not as a secret, not as a label, but as a woman, human, flawed, loving, afraid. Vigils continued outside the prison gates, candles flickering against the cold wind. But far from the noise, inside a small evidence storage room, a box sat on a metal shelf, sealed with tape and dust. Inside it were Maya's belongings, a purse, a notebook, a stack of folded letters. Weeks later, when the investigation closed, those items were released to her sister, Lila. She took them home, sat at her kitchen table, and began to read through the pieces of a love that had ended in blood. Maya's handwriting filled the pages, soft curves, ink smudged where tears had fallen. The first letters were light, full of hope. She wrote about the day Derek's first message arrived. He sounded lost. Like someone standing in a dark room, waiting for a light to flick on. I want to be that light. There were stories about her childhood, about learning to live as herself, about fear. In one entry, she confessed what she could never tell him aloud. I worry every day that if he ever learns who I was, he'll see me as something broken. I just want one person to look at me and not see the before, just see me. Lila closed the notebook, her hands trembling. She had begged Maya not to visit that last time. You don't owe him that truth, she'd said. But Maya had insisted. I can't love him halfway. Among the letters, one stood out, an envelope never sent. The postmark space was blank, her handwriting rushed, uneven. It began without greeting, "I know you'll hate me when I tell you. I know you'll think everything between us was fake. But it wasn't. I never lied about loving you. That part, the way I waited for your letters, the way I believed you could be better, that was always real." Lila read on, tears streaking down her cheeks as the letter continued. "You said once that prison took everything from you. I wanted to give something back, hope, love, something you could hold on to. But I was scared. Not of you, but of what the world made you believe you had to be. If this is the last thing I ever write to you, know this, I didn't want to trick you. I wanted to be brave enough to trust you. Maybe if I'd told you sooner, we'd both still be whole." The final line trailed off mid-sentence, the pen mark smudged, the ink fading into nothing. Lila folded the letter gently, pressing her forehead against it. "She never lied," she whispered into the silence. Across town, a small news segment aired, showing the same footage from Maya's vigil. Candles arranged in a circle, people singing softly. The reporter's voice carried through the night. Maya Lane's story continues to spark national dialogue about truth, acceptance, and love in the face of fear. Her words, recovered from her personal journal, paint a picture not of deceit, but of courage. Inside his cell, Derek watched the same broadcast on the small TV mounted above the toilet. He didn't flinch when her photo appeared. He didn't move when they read from her letter. But something in his eyes shifted, a flicker, brief but undeniable. "I never lied about loving you." The words lingered in his head long after the screen went dark. He sat there, staring at the blank reflection of himself on the glass. For the first time, he couldn't tell which voice was louder, his anger or his guilt. He closed his eyes and heard her laugh again, not in fear, not in pain, but in the way she once did when she believed he could change. For a fleeting second, Derek wanted to believe that too. But belief, like forgiveness, was something that could no longer reach him. The day came quietly, without fanfare, gray skies, cold air, the kind of rain that doesn't fall hard but lingers like sorrow. Inside the state penitentiary, the corridors smelled faintly of bleach and steel. The guards moved in silence, their faces unreadable. At the far end of the death row wing, Derek Cole sat on his bunk, staring at the wall where his shadow trembled under the flickering light. He had known this moment would come. The lawyers stopped visiting months ago, appeals denied, petitions ignored. The world outside had moved on, except for the handful who still came to the gate each year to light candles for Maya. Her face had become an emblem, her story folded into speeches, classrooms, protests. Justice for Maya Lane had turned into something larger than both of them. When the warden appeared at his cell door, Derek didn't look up at first. "It's time," the man said softly. Derek nodded once. His hands were steady as they cuffed him, his steps slow but sure as they led him through the narrow corridor. The echo of boots on concrete filled the space, a sound that seemed to stretch on forever. The execution chamber was sterile, too bright. The air hummed with the cold efficiency of ritual. Beyond the small glass window, a few witnesses sat in silence. Journalists, activists, a priest, and Maya's sister, Lila. Her eyes met his for a second. There was no hatred there, no satisfaction, only something weary and infinite, like she'd already spent her whole life mourning. A priest stepped forward, murmuring last rites. Derek barely heard the words. His mind drifted elsewhere, back to the letters, the smell of paper, the warmth of words that once made him believe he could be something better. When the warden asked if he had any final statement, Derek's throat tightened. He stared up at the ceiling, the lights blurring slightly. "I don't got much left to say," he began, voice hoarse. "They say the truth sets you free. But sometimes the truth just kills everything in its way. It killed her. It killed me long before today." He paused, his breath uneven. "She wasn't my lie. I was hers." The room stayed silent. Somewhere behind the glass, someone started to cry quietly. Derek turned his head toward the observation window. His eyes lingered on Lila. For a brief second, he thought he saw Maya standing behind her, smiling, gentle, the way she used to look in those first visits. The image flickered like light through rain. He whispered, barely audible, "Maya." The needle slid in. His body stilled. The heart monitor pulsed, then slowed. A single tear cut down his cheek as his lips parted one last time, forming her name again, soundless now. Outside, thunder rumbled. The rain thickened, hammering against the prison roof, washing the gray world clean, or at least trying to. Minutes later, a guard exited the chamber and quietly